You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, go ahead and get us started.
Hi, I'm Ivan Zach, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Chris Menges. We're going to talk about genetic testing. Dr. Chris Menges received his DVM from Texas A&M University. Following practice at a small animal clinic, he completed Masters of Public Health Epidemiology from University of Texas School of Public Health. He is the Chief Veterinary Officer of Basepaws, an animal health and genetic company where he pursues his passion of preventative medicine, genomics, and effective population communication. He also continues to work as a small animal practitioner, where his interests include alternative service delivery models and underserved animal populations. Welcome to the show, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
So I'm super interested about that last bit of your biography that I just read, and it's about alternative service delivery models. Can you expand on that?
Well, this is of course not quite related to genetics on there, but as y'all know, as an industry, the veterinary industry has a little bit been slow to innovate, not just from a technology standpoint side, but also, I think, in my opinion, from a little bit from a consumer side and how we provide our offerings, and being able to look at how we can take our medicine and make it a little bit more, if we can make it more cost effective or more available to certain populations to try and improve the overall health, like certain types of vaccine clinics and things like that.
Chris, it's really interesting that you say that. I mean, a year and a half ago when we started the podcast, it felt like veterinary medicine was definitely behind the curve. And what we've seen over the year that we've been doing the podcast is there's just so much innovation, but it happens kind of in a vacuum and not everybody knows about it. And so it's one of the joys of this podcast and bringing Basepaws and other companies to our listeners. So with that said, can you maybe back up and tell us a little bit about how you got involved and what your mission is and what you guys have been up to?
Well, certainly. Well, so Basepaws has been, as you know, an extremely new company. It's part of this new wave of innovation that we've been seeing over the past 2, 3, 4 years on there. And so Basepaws was founded in late 2016, early 2017, coming out of Singularity University. And at that time, I had finished my Master's of Public Health and Epidemiology and was doing a little bit more work on population health matters, including some infectious disease work. And I was looking at Basepaws in this genetic space. Genetics satisfies a couple really interesting desires and passions that I have, including not only the population health, but the preventative health, as well as that need for education and able to catch people up and show them new possibilities that we have in this industry. And so I was able to reach out to Basepaws, and as pretty early on in the company, so that we were able to set a good survey and make sure that as these samples are coming in, our genetic samples are coming in, we're able to ask people to complete physical surveys as well about diseases or traits, so that we're able to pair this information and learn more about the genetics themselves as our database grows.
That's really cool. And so tell us about the founding of the company. So you reached out as it sounds like as a scientist, as a doctor that was really interested in what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But how did it get lifted off? Tell me a little bit more about the Singularity University. I remember going to, I think it was a live webinar in the tech hub that my company's located in. But for the listeners that don't know anything about that, could you just kind of maybe spread a little bit more information to them?
Of course, it's a great program. Singularity University combines business leaders, entrepreneurs with scientific minds who may have ideas about technologies that can influence a space. And from Singularity University, our CEO and one of our founders, Anna Skaya, she was on the entrepreneur side, went over there and they came up with the idea and looked at the space and found that there was a really interesting inflection point going on with the cost of sequencing coming down. Cost of genetic sequencing coming down, as well as the ability to provide a need in a space, the feline genetic space, which was pretty unfortunately empty even back 3 to 4 years ago, and provide that service need for customers who so many people want to know more about There are cats with so many that just show up either from rescues or adopt themselves or at a work and really have that kind of mystery history going on.
That's awesome. So with that, I have a cheeky question, but if they didn't have you on board, how did they lift this off the ground without the chief veterinarian, if that was the main idea?
Well, so they lifted off the ground while I am the chief veterinary officer and can do a lot of great things about how we do preventative medicine, how we mold and create surveys. There, we also have a chief operating officer who's a geneticist, PhD geneticist from Oxford that helped create the base for this technology and helped is really pushing our technology from a research and development standpoint towards improving our sequencing so that we can get more and more data out of each sample for a lower and lower cost. Even since we've started, we're able to now harvest almost twice as much genetic data for our cost of is still going down from there. So yeah, that's how there's so many different parts in this. Unfortunately, it's hard for someone to be the geneticist, the veterinarian, the communicator, everything all at once, and it requires a great team.
Okay, that makes sense now. So if we're talking about Basepaws as a product, if I'm
Mhm.
a consumer, a customer, how would I use it? What problem am I trying to solve, and how is it accessed, and what answers does it give it?
And can I add one more thing to that too? If I'm a veterinarian, how could I interject this into my workflow?
Absolutely. There are kind of two sides. We'll talk about the consumer side first and then the veterinary side on there. So, the consumer side, the problem that we typically are answering for the consumer side is I have a cat. It showed up. I got it from the rescue, and I just want to know more about it. I want to know more about this potential story. It looks either like it's larger than a normal cat or smaller than what I would consider a normal cat or has a different hair coat pattern. And I really just want to learn more. This is so bonded to me that I need to dive into depths, the kind of the full depths with this. And so that's where our breed relativity product comes in. And that's primarily what our consumers are looking for. And so with that breed relativity product, we take our full pedigree samples, we whole genome sequence them. And because we're able to do sequencing as opposed to microarray, which whereas in microarray, you kind of have to know the questions you want to ask about the genetics, as opposed to sequencing, you can get more raw data out. We're able to then compare the samples, DNA samples to our whole genome sequence samples to figure out which sections are more closely related. What sections do you have that are normally associated with a Maine Coon, with an Abyssinian, with a Burmese, so that we can start to see which breeds are you kind of relatively more closer to. And so that's normally how we see it with customers, with kind of consumers, the lay public consumers. For access, typically this is purchased either on Amazon or through our website. The kit is then shipped to them, which has a swab included in it. The swab is very easy to use. It takes about 5 to 10 seconds in one of the cheek pouches. Now, 5 to 10 seconds may seem like a short time, but to some of our owners, that seems like an eternity. We still have not had any cases that we've heard of any bites or anything like that. They go in there. It's a pretty quick and easy, painless process. And then that also has a stabilization fluid. So then once they swab it, put it in the stabilization liquid, send it back to our lab where we're able to process it, extract the DNA, and then sequence and look for those breed markers. Now, our test is breed and health markers. So with the health markers, those are more usually on the veterinary side of interest. They kind of want to know from a genetic standpoint, either from a breeding standpoint, particularly for breeds like Maine Coons or Persians, about any potential health genetic risks that may go on from there. We do the same process from that standpoint, and then we sequence those markers themselves. So typically in a sequencing run, we get somewhere between a few thousand. We run it a few thousand times and then make sure that we kind of look at the average and the ratio if there's a mutant or wild type that we're able to analyze. But we have enough runs with the thousands of runs that we can say it with a extremely confident degree of certainty on there.
That's awesome. So I have a question.
Mhm.
Do you have cats?
I do not have a cat right now. There is a dog in the situation that is complicating that answer. But I will have cats again at some point.
And Chris, I've got another question. So a lot of sole practitioners, a lot of consolidators listen to our podcast, and so the thing that pops into my mind right away is if I'm going into a veterinary clinic for the first time with my cat,
Mhm.
what a great offering! Like what a great like little upsell. We also have this product. Is that how you're working inside the veterinary practice, or could you maybe expand upon that a little bit?
Absolutely. We recently we launched as a direct consumer company, and we've kind of recently launched our vet model as well, and that is where kind of our wholesale model. So if you do want to know more about that, you're welcome to go to our website www.basepaws.com. Our goal long term for this product, as we learn more, we're able to add more offerings like our goal is to have more preventative wellness offerings like risks for type 2 diabetes, or as nutrigenomics grows, ability to add nutrigenomics or customized nutrition into this profile itself. So that as the customer comes for their first visit and they want to know more about their cat, be able to turn around and give them the data about it. The genetic data, analyze those genetics for them, and swab them in the hospital, ship it out, and then get the results back to both the veterinarian and the customer from there. So we are, like I say, we are still fledgling and early in that, but look at us at basepaws.com. We have a veterinary page on there that also includes some fantastic white papers about our breed test itself, as well as our health marker test. And it also includes a quick reference guide that you can download that covers all of the genetic diseases in our panel, as well as recommendations from health and breeding recommendations for those, and the way that they are inherited.
So I have a question about the sort of popularity of this. So uh, I come from Ukraine, and I've been around Europe, and I see that the purebred dogs and cats are more popular in Europe. In North America, there is a big trend to have a mixed breed dog to decrease the level of breeding and the puppy mills and all that. How is this popular compared to dogs? Because in North America, I haven't seen that many breeds that are purely represented. And how much is there interest from the general public to actually research what is in the genetic mix of your cat?
There's actually we've got a pretty decent drive on there. We've had a lot of really great, the biggest, honestly, truly, honestly, the biggest barrier, and it's probably the biggest barrier for dog genetic testing as well, is not the interest, but more the cost. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to bring our costs down to make it a little bit more of an easier offering. So our test is at $130 right now. But if you wait around, we usually have a sale every now and then that brings it down to 110 or 100, something like that. It brings it up a little bit. But the genetic offering, there's really a lot of interest in learning more. There's so much mystery that comes with a cat, with most of the cats. I think the stats are about 9% of the cats in the US are pedigreed. And so they have some sort of paper attached to them. But that means 91% of the cats are not.
Wow.
91% of these people are getting cats. We have an extremely large amount of people that get cats from shelters, whether it just be litters that were found, or with feral cat populations, if they're not appropriately managed, there can be an extremely large amount of those as well. Cats coming from that standpoint as well. And when you share a household with these cats, and really in many terms share a life with these cats, people want to know as much as they can. And that's what we're really trying to give them, is that learning and that education.
Very interesting. And I like what you said that every cat comes with a lot of mystery, also with a lot of injuries if you're an emergency veterinarian like I am. So, um, how do the veterinarians react to this? I mean, I think it's a fantastic long-term vision that with the more breed understanding, then parallel that with the understanding of genetic diseases that are incorporated in certain breeds. And then that way, maybe look in the future of, I mean, I can see it tied back to wellness plans, which is
Mhm.
actually very interesting, where you can design your own wellness plans with the genetic build of the pet, knowing that, let's say, this breed is more prone to diabetes. I can see the tie into basically, providing a specific screening tests for the animals. So, do veterinarians see that long term vision, and do they use it for those purposes, or is it more like a sort of, my, pet owner wants to know the breed of the animal, and that's how they would consume that product.
Well, there is right now, from a veterinary perspective, it's hard sometimes in the clinic, as you know, to look for a long-term perspective of things. So many of the problems that come in are very short-term problems. They're either injury problems, disease problems, breeding problems, very, very specific outcome goals. And so with our health markers, it's been much more, we've had a lot more interest on that standpoint because the breed, while it's interesting and it's not clinically, verified data at this point in time. We're working to get to that point. That is that long-term vision, that impact on the wellness plans that we're working towards. But we do have, with the health markers, the 38 markers for 17 diseases, and we should be able to be adding more in about July to August. That is our goal. COVID, unfortunately, has slowed us down a little bit in our R&D cycle, but that is the goal, to have more, even more health markers for the same price as we continue our R&D and bringing that price down. And that's really what drives that short-term answer for veterinarians. We're seeing that a lot of our younger veterinarians are having more of that long-term perspective. They're still learning more or kind of learning a little bit more about the biotech as they're going through college and going through vet school. But really that short-term health marker drive that we're able to give is where a lot of the veterinary purpose is right now. As we learn, one of the things we're so excited to do is offer this to a mixed population, a mixed breed cat population. When we start to look at feline genetics as a kind of literature bank right now, a lot of that research has been done on pedigree breeds, but that only makes up 9% of the population that we're treating as veterinarians. And so being able to do this on that larger scale with the big phenotype physical trait survey we give folks, which is about 85 questions long, we're hoping to also learn more about that population that we're actually really treating.
So I don't want, I was just thinking when you were talking about that aspect of it, I don't want to design your business, but the entrepreneurial gene is playing in me. And I'm just thinking, did you ever think of actually talking to insurance or wellness plan companies? Because if you were to incorporate this into pre-wellness plan application in the clinic, and you would say on the 9% of pure breed population, we know that these are the most common conditions. Therefore, you can test a cat in advance to prescribing the wellness plan with this sort of security of treating potentially disease that can come with the genetic build of that particular animal. So there might be some angle on going through wellness or insurance companies to actually get this product to market.
Yeah, and we certainly have talked to them a little bit. Genetic testing and insurance is still at we'll say a discovery phase on that standpoint. I think a lot of this driver that's going to be coming through, I think a lot of the insurance companies are actually just waiting to see how it's managed through the human realm. To kind of give them a little bit more of an idea of how it may affect or how to implement it in kind of large scale wellness plans. But that is certainly something that we have been looking at and are hoping to be able to fully integrate with as in the next few years.
It's actually also a very scary thing, a scary prospect if you think of it from the human medical perspective, especially in countries like the US, where it's mostly privatized health insurance. You think about, in order to get your health insurance, you have to take a DNS or genome test, and then you're like, oh, sorry, you don't make the cut. It's definitely different in animals, but very interesting area. I mean, it's super innovative. So much. It seems like you're very much at the groundswell of what will be, something that becomes part of, to some degree, everyday animal health life and everyday human life as things move forward. So it's very, very interesting, Chris, and it's been a pleasure to chat with you. Unfortunately, like every week, we always run out of time. So the way that we like to wrap up the episodes is we've got a couple of questions we'd like to ask you. First is, you're a really interesting guy. This is a great episode. What's a book, a TED Talk, something that you found that's inspired you lately that you'd like to share with our listeners?
So one of my favorite books from kind of an inspiration standpoint, I would consider is called Thing Explainer, Complicated Stuff in Simple Words by Randall Monroe. So it's not probably kind of a typical innovation book itself, but it really helps shift your perspective. The purpose of this book, so Randall Monroe writes a webcomic called xkcd.com, and it's fantastic, very smart and very clever. But this book takes some very complicated items, whether it be from the Constitution or a nuclear reactor, and creates explanations of them that are based solely on the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And so you have to take your mind, take what can be a very complex, very scientific item, and then turn it around and explain it in the most basic of terms while people can still understand what's going on. And that shift in that focus, I think, is a huge driver for innovation so that you can really see another angle. Where is your customer coming from? Where is this veterinarian coming from? Where is the business coming from? And understanding those angles, being able to see those angles helps to really flesh out a problem and a solution.
Very interesting. It's almost like life lessons for dummies. I think Shawn needs that.
Oh man, I was totally gonna jump in there. I had a anyways. Ask the next question.
So we want to wrap up with a question. Do you know any other innovators in this space that we should invite to this podcast?
And we're looking for a replacement co-host. So if you know
Oh, well, so I would recommend any of the kind of some three great people from Anavive. Anavive is a newer pharmaceutical company that is working to kind of help push pharmaceuticals through data and technology. And so the three folks from there are Dr. Dave Bruyette, Dr. Chad Dodd, or their CEO, Dylan Balls. And they also have really interesting, recently, they were working on approving a drug through the FDA for FIP that actually appears to have some efficacy against COVID-19. So they switched, and they're now actually getting a drug approved that originally intended for FIP, which will eventually still be approved for FIP or submitted for FIP, but being able to transition and help with that pandemic so that we can see how this innovation improves not only the veterinary space, but the human space as well.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinarynnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.